She walked past the three warring alphas, their roars fading into silence. The entire gathering held its breath as the rare Omega ignored every powerful suitor and knelt beside the blind, scarred outcast in the corner. And at her touch, his dormant wolf stirred for the first time in a decade. This was the Luna's choosing, the most brutal social game in werewolf society, where rare Omegas are fought over as prizes to cement political alliances. But Elara, the most coveted Omega in a generation, had just broken every single rule. By choosing the pack's forgotten and broken soldier, she didn't just reject three furious alphas, she declared war on their entire world. Now everyone is asking one terrifying question. What happens when the man they left for dead decides to stop playing dead? To understand why her choice was an atomic bomb, you have to understand the world Elara was born into, and the man she chose. Elara wasn't just a rare Omega, she was a sovereign Omega, a one-in-a-century genetic anomaly. Her bloodline carried a dormant, stabilizing power, a calming influence so potent it could pacify an entire pack on the brink of war frenzy. In a world of brutal alpha dominance, she was the ultimate political weapon, a living peace treaty, and tonight, at the Grand Hall of Elders, she was to be claimed. The three alphas competing for her weren't just suitors, they were empires. First, Thuron of the Blackwater Pack. His family controlled the coastal shipping lanes, and his reputation was built on cold, economic ruthlessness. He saw Elara as a key asset to broker alliances with inland packs, a business transaction wearing a wedding ring. Then Rylan of the Ironwood Pack, a military commander whose territory bordered rogue-infested wildlands. He needed a sovereign Omega's power to bolster his warriors' morale and prevent berserker rages during battle. He saw her as strategic equipment. Finally, Dairian of the Silver Peak Pack. The youngest and most violently ambitious, Dairian was obsessed with lineage and pureblood dominance. He believed claiming a sovereign Omega would prove his genetic superiority and finally secure his pack a seat on the ruling High Council. He saw her as a trophy. The rules of the Luna's choosing were simple and brutal. The Omega would be presented. The competing alphas could display their strength, their wealth, their political offers, and then the Omega would choose. Refusing all three was not an option. The choice was mandatory, a duty to the stability of the broader werewolf nation. But no one had accounted for Elara, or for the fourth alpha in the room. Kale, formerly of the Stormcrest Pack, sat in the shadowed corner where the servants usually gathered. Once, he had been called the Ghost of the Northern Front, a tactical genius whose unit had the lowest casualty rates in history. 5 years ago, a catastrophic ambush by a rogue faction called the Blood Moon Howlers changed everything. His entire unit was slaughtered. Kale alone survived, but at a cost. The rogue alpha had used a cursed silver powder, blinding him permanently and severing his connection to his wolf. The trauma was so deep, his animal spirit retreated into a dormant coma, leaving him a shell. His own pack, Stormcrest, saw a blind warrior as a liability, a living reminder of a shameful defeat. They stripped him of his rank and quietly exiled him to the margins of society. Here, at the gathering, he was a ghost they all pretended not to see. Elara's life had been a gilded cage. From her first presentation, she was told her destiny was not her own. Her value was her genetics, her scent, her potential offspring. She was trained in politics, diplomacy, and pack management, not for her own sake, but to be a more useful ornament for whoever won her. As she was led into the torchlit hall tonight, draped in ceremonial silks, she felt the weight of 3 predatory gazes. Thuron offered a diamond necklace worth a city block. Rylan presented the ceremonial dagger of a defeated rogue alpha. Dairian simply flexed his aura, the raw dominance making several beaters in the crowd gasp. Elara's heart sank. This was her future, a transaction, a tool, or a possession. Then her gaze drifted past them, past the glittering elites, and into the shadows. She saw Kale, not with pity but with a shock of recognition. In a room screaming with aggressive, untamed power, he was an island of profound, aching silence. She didn't see a broken man. She felt the echo of the warrior he had been, the quiet strength that had survived the annihilation of his world. In that moment, the mandatory choice the elders demanded became a farce. Her so-called destiny felt like a prison sentence. The chief elder spoke. Ilara, sovereign Omega, you have witnessed the offers, you have felt their strength. Now fulfill your duty, choose your alpha. The hall fell silent. Thuron adjusted his cuffs, confident. Ryland stood at soldierly attention. Darian bared his teeth in a confident smirk. Ilara took a deep breath and walked. She passed Thuron's disappointed frown. She passed Ryland's confused scowl. She walked straight past Darian, whose smirk twisted into outrage. The crowd began to murmur in shock as she moved beyond the circle of light, into the periphery where the torches barely reached. She stopped in front of Kael. He couldn't see her, but he sensed a presence, flinching slightly as if expecting a blow or a cruel joke. Ilara did not speak to the elders. She spoke to him. Her voice, clear as a bell, cut through the static of whispers. "I see you," she said. Then she knelt on the cold stone floor beside his chair and placed her hand over his scarred one. The touch was a catalyst. For Ilara, it was like plugging into a live wire of quiet, steadfast resilience. For Kael, it was an earthquake in his soul. A warmth he hadn't felt in 5 years shot through his veins. Deep within the locked vault of his psyche, something massive and forgotten stirred. A low, internal growl, rusty from disuse, vibrated in his chest. His dormant wolf opened one psychic eye. Chaos erupted. Darian roared, "This is an insult, a joke." Thuron coldly addressed the elders. "The girl is clearly unwell. This cannot stand." Ryland just looked murderous, his hand on his weapon. The chief elder, face purple with rage, boomed, "Ilara, this is not a choice. The blind one is no alpha. He is less than a beta. He cannot lead, he cannot protect, he cannot sire a worthy bloodline. You will return and choose properly or face condemnation as a rogue." This was the cliffhanger, the ultimatum. Choose the rules or choose the outcast and be cast out yourself. Ilara looked from the furious elders to the 3 seething alphas and finally to Kael, whose hand was now trembling beneath hers, not with weakness, but with the awakening of a sleeping giant. She squeezed his hand and looked back at the chief elder, her own defiance crystallizing. And that's when Kael spoke. His voice was rough, unused, but it carried across the hall. "You're wrong." He stood up, pulling Ilara gently to her feet beside him. He still couldn't see, but he turned his head unerringly toward the chief elder's voice. "She just made the only choice that matters. And if you try to take her from me," he said, as a deep, real growl finally erupted from his throat, the sound shaking dust from the rafters, "you will remember exactly what I am." That growl was a line in the sand. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any roar. For 5 years, Kael's wolf had been a ghost. Now its presence filled the hall, a palpable, vibrating force that made the torches gutter. It wasn't the mindless rage of a challenged alpha. It was the focused, deadly resonance of a siege weapon powering up. Darian, the most aggressive of the 3, took an involuntary step back. He wasn't scared of a blind man. He was terrified of the legend he'd just remembered. The chief elder, Alastair, recovered first, his voice dripping with venom. "You dare growl at this council? You who were cast out? You have no standing here. Guards, remove the girl from the defective." But the guards hesitated. They were from mixed packs, and the primal authority in Kael's stance, the way Ilara stood with him, not hiding behind him, gave them pause. This wasn't a rescue, it was an alliance. Ilara spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "By the ancient right of the choosing, my selection is binding. My hand has been given and accepted. To break that is to break the oldest law, the one that predates your council. It would render every Luna's choosing from here forward meaningless. Is that the precedent you wish to set, Elder Alastair?" She had them. The entire ceremony was built on the inviolability of the Omega's choice. To overturn, it was to unravel the social fabric. Alastair's face contorted, trapped by the very traditions he enforced. It was Thuron, the businessman, who saw a loophole. "The law states the Omega must choose an alpha," he said smoothly. "But is he one? By what measure? He holds no territory, commands no pack, and carries the mark of exile. He is alpha in blood only. Therefore, the choice is void." Ryland, the soldier, nodded, grasping the tactical advantage. "A challenge, then, to prove his status. Let him hold a territory for 1 lunar cycle. If he can defend it, he is an alpha. If he cannot, the choosing is annulled." The proposal was a death sentence wrapped in legality. They would give Kale a territory, the most indefensible, rogue-infested scrap of land they could find, and then let the wilds, or a conveniently arranged rogue attack, do their work. Darian's smile returned, vicious and bright. "I know just the place, the Greyhold Expanse." A wave of horrified murmurs swept the crowd. The Greyhold was a cursed territory, a barren, mountainous wasteland on the border, perpetually shrouded in mist, claimed by no pack because it was considered ungovernable. It was the ground where Kale's original unit had been ambushed and destroyed by the Blood Moon Howlers. They weren't just sending him to die, they were sending him to die on the grave of his past. Ilara felt Kale's hand tighten around hers. She could feel the storm of memories and rage warring within him. To return, there was to walk into his deepest nightmare. He turned his head toward her, and though he couldn't see, his expression was a question. "Are you sure?" Before she could answer, Alistair slammed his staff. "So be it, Kale, formerly of Stormcrest, you are granted provisional alpha status and awarded the territory of Greyhold Expanse. You have 28 days to establish a hold, present a defensible border, and swear allegiance to the Council. Fail, and the bond is void, and Ilara will be rechosen." The verdict was a gavel strike. The three rival alphas exchanged looks of cold satisfaction. They had just sentenced Kale to a fate worse than a clean death and handed themselves a month to scheme. But as Kale and Ilara were escorted from the hall, something shifted. The pity in the crowd's eyes faded, replaced by a dawning, uncomfortable respect. He hadn't begged. He hadn't crumbled. He'd accepted a suicide mission without flinching. The ghost was walking back into the world. The journey to Greyhold was a silent, 2-day trek through increasingly bleak terrain. Ilara had been allowed to bring only a single pack of personal items. Kale had nothing but the clothes on his back and a borrowed sword. The escort guards dropped them at the edge of a jagged mountain pass, pointed toward a derelict stone watchtower in the distance, and left without a word. The air was thin and cold, smelling of wet rock and old blood. This was the place. Kale stood frozen, his unseeing eyes wide, every muscle locked. Ilara could hear his heart hammering, could feel the tremor in his hands. The trauma was a living thing, choking him. "Kale," she said softly, placing a hand on his chest. "Breathe. You are not alone here this time." He let out a shuddering breath. "I can smell them," he whispered. "The blood, my pack's blood, it's still in the stones." This was the first major pivot. Ilara's sovereign Omega power wasn't just about calming rage. It was about healing profound spiritual trauma. She didn't try to soothe the memory away. Instead, she did something unprecedented. "Then let's find it," she said. "Let's find the place, and I will help you bury it." Guided by his memory and her unwavering support, they climbed to the scorched rock where the ambush had happened. Kale fell to his knees, his fingers digging into the dirt. A raw, broken sound was torn from his throat. Ilara knelt beside him, and for the first time she consciously reached for her power, not to suppress, but to connect Asterisk. She let her own spirit touch the echo of the tragedy in the land, and then she focused it into a single, clear channel back to Kale, a lifeline through the pain. The effect was instantaneous. Kale's trembling stopped. The chaotic storm of grief and guilt began to order itself, not disappearing, but becoming a monument instead of an open wound. And deep within him, his wolf didn't just stir, it stood. It lifted its head, and Asterisk howled Asterisk. The sound was psychic, felt only by the two of them. It was a howl of mourning, of vengeance, and finally of return. Kale's senses, already heightened from his blindness, exploded. He could Asterisk feel the vibration of a rabbit's heartbeat 100 yards away. He could taste the specific mineral composition of the stream below. He could map the entire mountain slope by the echoes of the wind against the rocks. He wasn't regaining his sight, he was evolving beyond it. He stood, pulling Ilara up with him. His face was wet, but his voice was solid iron. "They think they gave us a graveyard to die in," he said. "They're wrong, they gave us a fortress, and I remember every inch of it." For the next week they worked. Kale, with his new seismic awareness, identified hidden caves, freshwater sources, and defensible choke points. Ilara, using her political training, started drafting codes of conduct and resource allocation plans. They were a perfect, if unlikely, partnership, a general who could see the battlefield in his mind, and a diplomat who could build a society from scratch. But their enemies were not idle. Thuron, through his trade networks, imposed a brutal embargo. No pack would sell them tools, food, or weapons. Rylan had his patrols, accidentally, harass any lone wanderer who might sympathize and head their way. Dairian, however, was the most direct. He sent a message, delivered by a terrified merchant who dared approach the border. It was a single, cured wolf pelt from a Stormcrest pack member. Attached was a note. "The Howlers send their regards. They're eager to finish the job. I told them where to find you." The Blood Moon Howlers were coming, and Dairian had just invited them to the party. Cale received the message without a word. That night, by their small fire in the watchtower, he said to Ilara, "We can't just defend, we have to recruit, and we have to strike first." Ilara looked at him, this man who was transforming from a broken soldier into a strategic force of nature. "How? We have no allies. No one will follow a blind alpha and a rogue omega." Cale's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "We don't need the packs. We need the people the packs threw away." He had a list. In his years in exile, he'd met others: disabled warriors, omegas abused by their bonds, beaters persecuted for their lack of dominant scent. The forgotten, the discarded, the ones who had nothing left to lose. He called them the Grey Sentinels, and he believed, with Ilara's power to heal their spirits and his ability to give them purpose, they could become an army. It was an insane, revolutionary idea. Build a pack not from bloodline, but from broken pieces. Ilara sent out the call, using secret channels known only to the underground network of outcasts. The message was simple: a place at the table, no ranks, no chains, a home for the haunted. The response was not immediate, but a week later, as the first snows dusted the Greyhold peaks, a figure appeared at the edge of the tree line, then another, and another. A woman with a mangled arm who had been a master blacksmith before her injury, a young Omega male, mute from trauma, who could track anything by scent, an older beater, a former strategist, deemed too cautious for modern pack warfare. They came hesitant, scarred, and hopeful, 20 in total. It wasn't an army, it was a beginning. Cale stood before them, Ilara at his side. "They gave us this land to die in," he said, his voice carrying on the thin air. "We will make it a land worth living for. We will build walls not just of stone, but of will. And when our enemies come, and they will break against us." But as the new community began the back-breaking work of fortification, a scout, the mute Omega, came rushing back, his eyes wide with panic. He gestured frantically to the north, then made the sign for many, and the sign for wolf, and then drew a claw across his throat. The Blood Moon Howlers weren't waiting for the lunar cycle. They were here, now, and they weren't just a rogue band. They were a horde. The scout's estimate was wrong. It wasn't a horde, it was an entire war pack. Over 50 Blood Moon Howlers poured through the northern pass, a tide of mangy fur, cracked leather, and maddened eyes. These weren't disciplined soldiers. They were feral addicts, sustained by a concoction made from cursed silver and rogue blood that sent them into a pain-blind frenzy. Their alpha, a massive brute named Vayek, led from the front, his howl promising slaughter. In the derelict watchtower, panic threatened to shatter the Grey Sentinels before the first blow landed. They were 20 scarred civilians against a legion of berserkers. Cale didn't shout orders. He stood in the center of the main floor, his head tilted, listening to the mountain itself. "Ilara, the East Ridge. The sound is echoing wrong. There's a second group flanking us." Ilara relayed the command. The former strategist, the beater named Arlen, stared. How can he know that? He can't see the ridge. "He doesn't need to," Ilara said, her voice steady. "He can hear the density of the air moving over the rocks. Trust him." This was the first test of their insane alliance. Cale, the blind general, began calling out coordinates as if reading a map only he could feel. "Archers, loose at the gully mouth now. Blacksmith, reinforce the west gate hinge. It's vibrating at a frequency that means it's about to fail. Mute tracker, send check the southern cave. If the wind shifts, they'll use it." His commands were unnervingly precise. The Grey Sentinels moved, their initial fear hardening into focused action. They were defending their first real home. Ilara climbed to the top of the tower. She reached for her sovereign Omega power, not to pacify her own people, but to do something she'd never attempted: project a wave of pure, calming certainty outward toward the attacking frenzy. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a whisper. The sheer, drug-fueled rage of the Howlers was a wall of psychic noise. She strained, a trickle of blood escaping her nose from the effort. Down below, Vayek and the main force hit the makeshift palisade. The fighting was brutal and immediate. Kale didn't stay in the tower. He moved into the courtyard, his borrowed sword a blur. He didn't fight by sight, but by sensing the displacement of air, the shift in sound, the minute vibrations in the ground. To the Howlers, he was a phantom, striking from angles they couldn't predict, moving through the chaos as if it were a choreographed dance. His dormant wolf was fully awake now, not a separate beast, but an integrated part of his consciousness, a lethal sixth sense. But they were still hopelessly outnumbered. A Howler broke through, lunging for Ilara on the tower. Kale, 10 yards away, sensed the threat. In a move of pure instinct, he didn't just throw his sword. He commanded Asterisk it. A pulse of focused will, a manifestation of his alpha authority, left his hand. The sword shot through the air like a spear, impaling the Howler an inch from Ilara. It was an impossible feat. Alpha dominance wasn't telekinesis. The revelation hit Kale even as he fought bare-handed. The cursed silver that blinded him and severed his wolf hadn't just damaged him. In his 5 years of dormant agony, his spirit had been forced to adapt, to grow in a different direction. His alpha power hadn't faded, it had mutated, becoming a tangible force of will. He roared not in anger, but in triumphant realization. This time, the sound wasn't just noise. It was a physical wave of pressure that knocked 3 charging Howlers off their feet. The Grey Sentinels felt it too, a surge of invigorating strength, a clarity of purpose. They fought harder. Ilara, seeing his breakthrough, redoubled her efforts. Instead of trying to blanket the Howlers, she focused her power into a single, piercing lance of tranquility, aiming directly for their source of madness, Vayek, the Alpha. She targeted the bond that connected him to his pack. On the battlefield, Vayek suddenly stumbled, his berserker rage flickering. A moment of horrible, sober clarity filled his eyes, the clarity of a man realizing the monstrous things he'd done. He looked at his own claws, stained with the blood of Kale's original unit, and let out a wail of despair. The Howlers around him faltered, confused by the break in his murderous intent. It was the opening Kale needed. He was on Vayek in an instant. The fight was short and brutal, but Kale didn't deliver a killing blow. He pinned the rogue Alpha and spoke, his voice cutting through the din. "The silver dust. Who gave it to you 5 years ago? Who told you we would be here today?" Vayek, broken by Ilara's power, gasped. The powder came from the Silver Peak Smithies. The message came on Darian's personal seal. He said to leave no one alive this time, especially not the Omega. There it was, the smoking gun. Darian hadn't just alerted the Howlers for sport. He had been their secret patron from the beginning. The ambush that destroyed Kale's life and tonight's attack were both orchestrated by the same arrogant Alpha who thought he deserved Ilara. As Vayek spoke the truth, the fight went out of the remaining Howlers. Some fled. A few, those not too far gone, dropped their weapons, the frenzy broken by their Alpha's defeat and Ilara's lingering influence. The Grey Sentinels had won. They stood panting, wounded, but victorious amid the bodies and the smoking ruins of their first wall. They had defended the impossible. But the cost of the revelation was even higher than the battle. If Darian was exposed as a conspirator with rogues, a crime punishable by death, he would stop at nothing to silence them. And he had the resources of an entire powerful pack behind him. They had survived the first wave, but they had just ignited a much more dangerous war. A war not with mindless rogues, but with a cunning, wealthy, and now desperate political enemy. 3 days later, as they buried their dead and repaired the walls, a formal messenger arrived, not from Darian, but from the High Council. Elder Alastair himself had come to inspect their progress. He surveyed the defended territory, the coordinated sentinels, the captured Howler prisoners, and his face was unreadable. He listened, stone-faced, As Kale and Alara presented their evidence against Darien, Vayek's testimony, the remnants of the cursed silver with Silver Peak markings. Alistair finally spoke. These are serious accusations against a sitting alpha from a founding pack. They require deliberation. The challenge of holding Greyhold for a lunar cycle remains. However, he said, his eyes lingering on the unified sentinels, on Alara's calm authority, on Kale's unsettling, powerful presence, provisional status is upgraded. You may formally swear your pack. Name it. This was a pivotal moment. To swear a pack was to make it real in the eyes of the moon and the law. Kale turned to Alara, a silent question. She nodded. He faced the elder and the gathering of scarred, hopeful faces. "We are the ghosts they tried to forget," Kale announced, his voice carrying. "We are the strength they threw away. We swear our bonds not by bloodline, but by loyalty forged in shadow. We are the Greyhold Pack." A ripple of awe went through the sentinels. They had a name. They were real. Alistair gave a curt nod, but his eyes were calculating. "So sworn, continue your work. The council will consider the evidence." As soon as the elder's entourage disappeared down the mountain, Arlen the strategist approached, his face grave. "He didn't believe us, or he doesn't care. Darien's family is too powerful, too connected on the council. This evidence will vanish into committee forever. We have won the battle, but lost the legal war." Alara understood. They had proven themselves as defenders, but they were still outsiders. The law would not protect them from a pack like Silver Peak. Darien would now be forced to destroy them completely to cover his tracks. That night, under a moon that felt both like a blessing and a target, Kale made a decision. "We can't wait for the next attack. We can't rely on the council. We have to take the fight to him, not with claws, but with the one thing he cares about more than his life, his reputation." Alara looked at him, seeing the full, terrifying scope of the general he had once been. "What are you planning?" Kale's expression was grim. "Darien sells himself as the pureblood ideal. What if the world found out he was a liar and a butcher? What if the other alphas, Thuron and Rylan, found out he used cursed silver, a weapon forbidden by all pact treaties, and that he's been secretly farming rogue attacks to make himself look like a hero?" It was a dangerous gambit. To expose Darien, they would need to get inside Silver Peak territory, find irrefutable proof, and deliver it to his rivals without getting killed. It was espionage, a suicide mission. But as Kale laid out the bare bones of the plan, a figure stepped from the shadows of the watchtower. It was the mute Omega tracker. He had been listening. He moved to the dirt floor and began to draw with a stick. Not a map of the land, but a detailed schematic of the Silver Peak stronghold, guard rotations, sewer access points, the location of Darien's private study. He had been a prisoner there before he escaped. The mute tracker pointed to himself, then to Kale and Alara, then made a slicing motion across the map towards Silver Peak. The message was clear: "I know the way, I will lead you." The mission was no longer a vague idea. It had a guide, it had a target, and it had a deadline. They would have to leave their hard-won fortress vulnerable, trust their new pack to hold it, and walk directly into the heart of the enemy's power. If they succeeded, they could shatter Darien and change the balance of power forever. If they failed, Greyhold would be left leaderless, and everything they had built would be erased. As Kale and Alara prepared to slip into the night, the weight of the choice settled on them. They had started by defying tradition, then they had survived a siege. Now, they were about to become something the werewolf world hadn't seen in centuries. They were about to become revolutionaries. Infiltrating Silver Peak wasn't about strength against strength. It was about shadows against light, and the shadows knew every crack in the fortress. Guided by Fen, the mute tracker, Kale and Alara moved through the mountain wilderness like ghosts. Fen's detailed knowledge was their map. Kale's evolved senses were their radar, detecting patrols by the vibration of their footsteps long before they were seen. Alara's role was to be their emotional cloaking device, using her Omega power to project a subtle, calming blanket over their small party, making them seem like part of the landscape to any wolf on edge. They entered Silver Peak not through a gate, but through a forgotten glacial runoff tunnel that Fen had used to escape years before. The tunnel led into the bowels of the stronghold, the reeking underbelly of Darien's shining legacy. Their target was Darien's private study, located in the oldest part of the keep, away from prying eyes. According to Fen, it was where Darien conducted his most discreet business. The evidence they needed, the records of the cursed silver transactions, the communications with the Blood Moon Howlers, would be there under heavy lock and magical ward. Navigating the servant corridors and avoiding patrols was a tense, silent ballet. At one point, a guard patrol passed within feet of their hiding spot. Kale, his hand on the stone wall, felt the shift in air pressure and held up a fist. They froze. Ilara focused, pushing a gentle wave of nothing to see here towards the guards. The patrol leader paused, scratched his head, and moved on, feeling an inexplicable urge to be elsewhere. They reached the study door. It was sealed with a complex lock and a blood ward, a security measure that would alert Darien if anyone but him opened it. This was the obstacle they hadn't fully planned for. Ilara looked at the ward, a faint red glyph pulsating on the doorframe. "It's keyed to his bloodline," she whispered. "Only a Silver Peak Alpha can open it without triggering an alarm." Kale, however, was listening to the ward itself. He placed his palm near the glyph, not touching it. "It's not just blood," he murmured. "It's a frequency, a signature of his dominant energy." He closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in concentration. "My will, my mutated alpha power, it's about imposition of intent. Maybe I don't need his blood. Maybe I can mimic his frequency." It was a staggering risk. If he was wrong, or if his control slipped, the entire keep would be on them in seconds. Ilara and Fen exchanged a worried glance but nodded. They had come too far. Kale took a deep breath and extended his will towards the ward. He wasn't trying to break it. He was trying to convince it he was Darien. He focused on the memory of Darien's arrogant, aggressive aura from the choosing and projected a mirror of that frequency, layered with his own refined control. The red glyph flickered, stuttered, and then faded to a dull gray. The lock clicked open. Inside, the study was a monument to vanity and paranoia. Trophies lined the walls. A massive desk dominated the room. They worked quickly. Fen went to a concealed panel in the wall he remembered from his time as a prisoner, revealing a safe. Ilara, using her knowledge of pack accounting, began rifling through ledgers on the desk. Kale stood sentinel at the door, his senses stretched to their limit, monitoring the heartbeat of the stronghold. "We have minutes," he whispered. "His personal guard does a circuit. The rhythm is off. They're early." "Found it," Ilara breathed, pulling a leather-bound journal from the safe. It was Darien's personal log. Page after page detailed the procurement of cursed silver from a banished alchemist, the payments to the Blood Moon Howlers to stage attacks on rival pack caravans, attacks Darien would then heroically fend off, and the specific order for the ambush on Kale's unit 5 years ago, described coldly as culling weak blood from the Alliance. It was more than they had hoped for. It was a confession. "Got the financial ledgers too," Fen signed, holding up a stack of papers stamped with Silver Peak's seal, showing the wire transfers to shell companies that funded the rogues. The sound of booted feet, too many and too close, echoed in the hall outside. They were out of time. "The window," Kale said, pointing to a large, leaded glass window behind the desk. "It's our only way." As the door handle began to turn, Kale unleashed a focused pulse of his will at the window. The reinforced glass didn't just break, it vaporized into a fine, silent powder. They leapt out into the cold night, 2 stories up, landing in a snowbank as shouts erupted from the study behind them. The escape was a frantic chase through the Silver Peak grounds. Alarms howled. But Kale, Ilara, and Fen were already ghosts again, slipping back into the runoff tunnel as the main gates slammed shut and search parties scrambled in the wrong direction. They didn't return directly to Greyhold. They went to Blackwater territory, to Thuron. The businessman Alpha received them in his office, his expression one of profound irritation until Ilara placed Darien's journal and the ledgers on his desk. Thuron read. His face went from annoyed to shocked to calculating and finally to cold fury. Darien's secret war wasn't just immoral, it was bad for business. The instability he created disrupted trade routes Thuron controlled. The use of forbidden, cursed silver threatened every treaty that kept the Pax from all-out war. Ryland needs to see this, Thuron said, his voice tight. Immediately. Within 48 hours, the two rival alphas, united by a common enemy and undeniable proof, presented the evidence to the High Council. They bypassed Elder Alastair entirely, going straight to the Council's highest justice. The fallout was swift and merciless. The Council, fearing a scandal that could ignite a civil war, acted with brutal efficiency. A conclave was called. Darian was summoned to answer the charges. He arrived arrogant and sneering until he saw Thuron and Ryland standing together and the journal held in the Chief Justice's hand. The trial was not a long affair. The evidence was incontrovertible. Darian's defenses crumbled. He was stripped of his alpha title, his pack placed under interim control, and he was sentenced to the Grey Depths, an underground prison where werewolves were cut off from the moon forever, their wolves slowly withering in the darkness. A fate considered worse than death. But the consequences rippled further. Elder Alastair, whose willful ignorance had nearly allowed the crime to continue, was forced to retire in disgrace. The Council, shaken by the corruption at its heart, had no choice but to formally recognize the Greyhold Pack. Cale and Ilara were summoned not as supplicants, but as equals. In the same grand hall where Ilara had knelt beside him, Cale now stood before the Council as a confirmed alpha. Ilara at his side as his Luna. The Chief Justice spoke. The Greyhold Pack has met and exceeded all challenges. You have defended your territory, exposed a grave threat to our society, and sworn your bonds. Your status is permanent. Your territory is yours in perpetuity. The victory was absolute, but the final, surprising detail came after the formalities. As they turned to leave the hall, the Chief Justice cleared his throat. Alpha Cale, a question, if you will. The blood ward on Darian's study. Our investigators found it disabled by mimicry, not force. A skill we have not seen in centuries. How did you achieve this? Cale paused. He knew the answer was his mutated power, born of trauma and adaptation. But he also knew that revealing the full extent of his abilities might make him a target all over again. He gave a slight, respectful bow. Justice, in my years of darkness, I learned to listen very carefully. Every lock has a tune. I simply learned to sing Darian's song. The answer was poetic, evasive, and deeply unsettling to the old wolves on the Council. It marked him not as a broken soldier, but as an unpredictable new power, a man who couldn't be controlled by their old rules. Returning to Greyhold was a hero welcome. Their pack had grown in their absence, more outcasts drawn by the story of the blind Alpha and the sovereign Omega who had toppled a corrupt prince. The fortress was no longer a ruin. It was a thriving, defiant community. That night on the walls of their home, Cale held Ilara close. It's over, he said. Ilara looked out at the stars over the mountains they had won. No, she said softly, a determined smile on her lips. It's just beginning. We have a pack to lead, and a world that needs to remember that strength has nothing to do with what you can see. Cale kissed her, the bond between them a brilliant, unbreakable thread in the tapestry of the night. The man they left for dead and the woman they tried to auction off had not just survived. They had rewritten the rules, and their story was a beacon, lighting the way for every other ghost waiting in the shadows to finally come home. The story of Cale and Ilara is more than a romance. It's a blueprint for a revolution. It shows us that the most sacred systems can be the most corrupt, and that the people pushed to the edges often hold the key to saving the center. For decades, the Omniverse genre has played with power dynamics, but usually within the same old hierarchy. The strongest alpha wins. This story asked a different question. What if winning isn't about being the strongest in the room, but about being the most aware? What if true power isn't dominance, but perception? Cale's blindness wasn't a weakness to be overcome by magic or mate love. It was the catalyst for a different kind of strength. His power grew in the dark, adapting and refining until it became something the sighted world couldn't comprehend. Ilara's Omega power wasn't just a passive tool for calming alphas. It was an active force for healing trauma and revealing truth. Together, they didn't fit into the old boxes, so they built a new world. And that's the lingering question this story leaves us with. How many Kales are sitting in the corners of our own worlds? How many brilliant, powerful people have been labeled defective, discarded because they don't fit the traditional mold of what strength looks like? How many Alaras are trapped in gilded cages, told their only value is in what they represent to others, rather than the change they could forge themselves? Their victory wasn't just about claiming a territory or a title. It was about validating a different way of being. It proved that a pack built on loyalty and shared purpose could be stronger than one built on fear and bloodline. It proved that the so-called defects, the blindness, the trauma, the quiet resilience, could be forged into the sharpest weapons. The werewolf world after Greyhold can never go back to the way it was. The myth of the perfect, untouchable alpha has been shattered. The council now has to contend with a new kind of leader, one who plays by a different set of rules. And in every pack, in every territory, the outcasts and the overlooked have heard a new story. They have a new myth to believe in, that the ghost can become a king and the pawn can become a queen. So the next time you see someone the world has given up on, remember the blind alpha and the sovereign omega. Remember that the most profound power often lies dormant, waiting for the right moment or the right person to spark it awake. The question is, in your life, are you waiting for the spark or are you ready to be one? If you are captivated by this journey of subverted tropes and hard-won redemption, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It lets us know you want more stories that challenge the status quo. Share this with anyone who loves a tale where the underdog doesn't just win, but rewrites the entire game. And subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the stories that aren't just told, but felt. Let us know in the comments, who is the most overlooked Kale in your favorite stories? Thanks for watching. Until next time.